Antinatalism. What if the most profound act of selfishness isn't acquiring wealth or power, but something far more common, having a child? It sounds jarring, even offensive to many, but it's the uncomfortable question at the heart of a philosophy called antinatalism. To grasp it, let's try a thought experiment. Imagine you hold a unique power, the ability to bring a brand new consciousness into existence. This person will experience life's full spectrum, its potential joys, and its inevitable sorrows. But here's the catch. You offer no guarantees. Their life might be filled with wonder, or it could be marked by unbearable suffering and despair. Crucially, the person you're about to create has absolutely no say in the matter. The choice is entirely yours. Do you bring them into being? This dilemma is central to antinatalism, a philosophy arguing against creating new sentient life. One of its most prominent contemporary voices is David Benatar. In his provocative book, Better Never to Have Been, Benatar introduces the concept of asymmetry between existence and non-existence. He argues that while being born brings both pleasure and pain, not being born avoids pain entirely, which is intrinsically good. While the non-existent also miss out on pleasure, Benatar contends this isn't a true deprivation because there's no one there to be deprived. However, for anyone who is born, suffering is an unavoidable guarantee, even alongside moments of joy. Benatar's stark conclusion: the guaranteed presence of pain in existence makes bringing someone into being ethically problematic, as it imposes harm and risk on an individual without their consent. But antinatalism isn't just an abstract philosophical puzzle. It's deeply rooted in the harsh realities of our world. Consider the sheer scale of suffering: poverty, disease, war, systemic injustice, mental anguish, looming environmental catastrophe. Even lives deemed good or privileged inevitably contain grief, anxiety, loss, and the inescapable fear of mortality. Antinatalists argue that creating a new life means knowingly subjecting another being to this often brutal and unpredictable reality. In a world already overflowing with pain, is procreation an act of hope, or is it an act of profound gamble, perhaps even recklessness or selfishness, played with someone else's existence? Philosopher Julio Cabrera approaches antinatalism from a different, yet complementary, ethical angle. He argues that the very act of procreation fundamentally violates moral principles, primarily the principle of consent. The person being created cannot agree to the risks and burdens inherent in existence. Therefore, bringing them into being is ethically dubious from the start. Cabrera pushes further, suggesting that procreation isn't primarily an act of love for the potential child, who doesn't exist yet to be loved, but rather an exercise of power by the parents, a unilateral decision with irreversible consequences for someone else. Beyond individual suffering, antinatalism often intersects with environmental ethics. Thinkers like Les Knight, founder of the voluntary human extinction movement, VEMT, argue that ceasing human procreation is perhaps the most compassionate choice, not only to prevent future human suffering, but also for the health of the planet itself. Knight's perspective stems from the undeniable reality of human impact: deforestation, mass extinction, climate change. The ecological cost of our species is staggering. From this viewpoint, a world eventually free of humans isn't a tragedy, but a potential return to balance, allowing the biosphere to heal and flourish without our often destructive presence. But what about life's undeniable joys? The laughter of a child, the warmth of love, the thrill of discovery. Don't these make existence worthwhile? Antinatalists often counter that these pleasures, while real, are frequently transient and ultimately overshadowed by the inevitable pain, loss, uncertainty, and the finality of death that life entails. The beauty, they might argue, doesn't negate the inherent potential for cruelty and suffering. Critics often label antinatalism as excessively pessimistic or nihilistic. However, many proponents insist their philosophy stems not from hatred of life, but from profound compassion, a recognition of existence's immense burdens and a conscious choice not to impose those burdens onto a new, unwilling individual. So, back to that hypothetical power to create life. Knowing the risks, the guaranteed suffering alongside the potential for joy, would you bring someone into this world? Or would you let that power lie dormant, sparing someone the gamble of existence? Antinatalism doesn't demand a specific answer, but it compels us to confront the question, challenging one of humanity's most fundamental assumptions, that creating new life is inherently, unquestionably good. Ephilism. Is life itself the problem? While antinatalism primarily focuses on the ethics of human procreation, a related and even more radical philosophy called ephilism, life spelled backward, sometimes with an F, takes the critique much further. It doesn't just question human existence. It questions the value of all sentient life, arguing that life itself, driven by the blind processes of evolution, is fundamentally flawed and inherently leads to suffering. Imagine existence not as a gift, but as a relentless, multi-billion-year-old factory. This factory mindlessly churns out organisms, each programmed to struggle for survival, experience pain, and ultimately die. It operates without intelligence or purpose, driven only by the imperative to replicate DNA. This, ethicists argue, is the engine of evolution, a process they see as not just imperfect, but fundamentally cruel. Life, in this view, is a self-perpetuating cycle of suffering without any higher justification. Think about the natural world, often romanticized. A lion hunts a zebra. For the lion to survive, the zebra must suffer terror and a violent death. Neither animal chose this dynamic. They're driven by hunger and fear, respectively. The suffering of one is the prerequisite for the survival of the other. What humans often call the balance of nature is, from an ethicist perspective, a constant, brutal struggle soaked in pain. This isn't just seen as tragic, but as evidence that life itself is intrinsically problematic. Ethilism extends this critique to human existence as well. Even in the best circumstances, our lives are shadowed by unavoidable realities: aging, sickness, loss, and death. Moments of joy are often fleeting, while difficulties can seem endless. For every peak experience, there are countless moments of frustration, disappointment, or quiet desperation. And this isn't unique to humans. Ethicists argue it applies to every creature capable of feeling pain or distress, from the smallest insect to the largest mammal, all caught in the same existential trap. The core ethicist argument is stark. Evolution, the process that generated life, has no concern for the well-being of the creatures it produces. Its sole goal is propagation, regardless of the cost and suffering. Life, therefore, isn't a miracle or a gift, but an unending loop of need, pain, competition, and death. To consciously perpetuate this cycle, ethicists believe, is not just meaningless, but potentially immoral on a cosmic scale. Consider another thought experiment. Imagine a button. If pressed, all sentient life in the universe would instantly and painlessly cease to exist. No more suffering, no more fear, no more struggle. Would you press it? This hypothetical scenario captures the essence of ethilism. It's a philosophy born not necessarily from hatred, but from an extreme form of compassion, a desire to end suffering absolutely, even if it means ending life itself. The ultimate act of kindness, from this perspective, might be to switch off the suffering machine entirely. Critics often dismiss ethilism as dangerously nihilistic or misanthropic, but proponents argue their position is based on rational assessment and deep empathy. If you wouldn't willingly subject an individual to pointless suffering, they ask, why endorse a system, life itself, that guarantees suffering on an unimaginable scale for countless beings? For ethicists, the logical conclusion is clear. Stop the machine, end the system, terminate the cruel experiment of life. It's a shocking, provocative stance that challenges our most ingrained beliefs about the value of existence itself. Ephilism offers no easy comfort. It forces us to confront the potentially brutal reality of life and ask an unsettling question. Is existence, across the board, worth the price of its inherent suffering? Existential loneliness, the unbridgeable gap within. No matter how connected we feel, how deeply we love, or how intimately we bond with others, there remains a part of us that is fundamentally, irrevocably alone. This is existential loneliness, a profound, persistent sense of isolation that arises not from a lack of company, but from the very nature of individual consciousness. It's the awareness that each of us is ultimately confined within our own subjective world, unable to fully share our innermost thoughts, feelings, and experiences with anyone else. This isn't the same as social loneliness, missing people, or temporary solitude. It's deeper, stemming from the realization of our ultimate separateness. We can communicate, empathize, and connect, but the unique quality of my experience, how I perceive the color red, feel grief, or understand an idea, remains fundamentally inaccessible to you, and vice versa. This is an inescapable condition of being a distinct, conscious self. Philosophers and writers have long explored this profound solitude. Soren Kierkegaard, often considered the father of existentialism, viewed the human journey as inherently solitary. He believed confronting this isolation was essential for authentic selfhood. Only by accepting our aloneness can we truly understand ourselves and take responsibility for creating a meaningful life. Existential loneliness, then, is not just a burden but a call to radical self-honesty. Friedrich Nietzsche explored this through his concept of the Übermensch, Overman. The path to self-realization and creating new values is often a lonely one, requiring individuals to break away from the herd mentality and forge their own path. For Nietzsche, this inherent loneliness wasn't something to be lamented, but a potential source of strength and individuation. Martin Heidegger linked this feeling to our awareness of mortality. His concept of being towards death highlights that our finitude is something each of us must face alone. No one can die for us or truly accompany us into that final unknown. This awareness underscores our fundamental separateness. Existential loneliness, while potentially anxiety-provoking, has also been a powerful source of creativity and insight. Artists, writers, and thinkers often draw upon their experiences of isolation to create works that resonate deeply with the universal human feeling of being apart. Franz Kafka's stories, for instance, masterfully capture feelings of alienation and misunderstanding, paradoxically creating connection through shared feelings of disconnection. This reveals the paradox. While the experience is intensely private, the fact of this private inner world is something we all share. It also raises fundamental questions about relationships. Can we ever truly know another person? Are our connections inherently limited by the unbridgeable gap between subjective worlds? Jean-Paul Sartre explored this tension, suggesting that while we crave connection, our attempts are often fraught with misunderstanding, objectification, the look of the other, and the projection of our own inner states onto them. For Sartre, the struggle for authentic connection is necessary but perpetual. However, existentialists don't necessarily view this inherent loneliness solely as a negative. It can be seen as an opportunity to confront life's deepest truths. When we accept our fundamental separateness, we are forced to look inward for meaning, purpose, and identity. This can be daunting, but can also spur profound self-discovery and personal growth. In this way, existential loneliness is both a trial and a gift. Modern psychology also recognizes the concept. Some research suggests that acknowledging and accepting existential loneliness, rather than fighting it, can enhance resilience and self-acceptance. Understanding it as a normal part of the human condition can reduce feelings of personal inadequacy or despair when perfect connection proves elusive. The focus shifts from trying to eliminate the fundamental separateness to building meaningful connections despite it. Existential loneliness reminds us of both the limits and the richness of human experience. It underscores that no one can live our lives for us, think our thoughts, or feel our feelings. But it also highlights the preciousness of genuine connection, empathy, and understanding when we do achieve moments of bridging that gap, however partially. The effort to connect, knowing the divide can never be fully closed, is perhaps what gives relationships their profound significance. Ultimately, existential loneliness isn't good or bad. It simply is. It challenges us to look inward, confront our fears and uncertainties, and find our own way in a complex world. By embracing our solitude, we may learn to live more authentically, connect more deeply when possible, and find meaning not by escaping our inherent separateness, but by navigating it with courage and compassion. Existential nihilism, facing the void of meaninglessness. Life has no inherent meaning. The universe is indifferent to our existence. Everything we strive for, success, love, knowledge, legacy, will ultimately dissolve into nothingness. This is the stark, cold realization at the core of existential nihilism, a philosophy that strips away comforting illusions and forces us to confront existence on its own terms. For many, this realization feels like peering into an abyss where all values and purposes crumble under the weight of cosmic indifference. But rather than shying away, existential nihilism demands we look directly into that void, acknowledging that there's no pre-written script, divine plan, or inherent cosmic order waiting for us. This perspective gained prominence through 19th and early 20th century thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Soren Kierkegaard, and the literary explorations of authors like Fyodor Dostoevsky. Nietzsche, in particular, saw the decline of traditional religious and moral systems, God is dead, as a pivotal moment. Humanity lost the framework that had provided meaning and coherence for centuries. Without a divine plan or ultimate authority defining our purpose, Nietzsche argued, humans are now adrift in a vast, purposeless universe, terrifyingly free. This lack of inherent meaning permeates every aspect of life. The jobs we do, the relationships we build, the goals we pursue, none possess intrinsic value beyond the meaning we subjectively assign to them. For the existential nihilist, this isn't necessarily pessimism. It's simply perceived reality. The universe operates according to blind physical laws, and any meaning we find is a human construct, fragile and ultimately temporary. Jean-Paul Sartre, an existentialist closely associated with nihilistic themes, offered a unique perspective on this void. He famously declared that existence precedes essence, meaning we are born without a predetermined purpose or nature. We simply exist first, and then, through our choices, we define ourselves. Sartre argued this lack of inherent meaning isn't a problem to be solved, but a fundamental condition of human freedom. We are condemned to be free, meaning we bear the full weight of creating value and meaning in our lives entirely on our own. There are no universal moral rules to guide us, no preordained paths to follow. This radical freedom is both exhilarating and terrifying. It leads to what's often called an existential crisis, the moment one truly grasps the potential meaninglessness of it all and asks, if nothing ultimately matters, why bother with anything? This question has haunted thinkers for ages, and many who confront it fall into despair or apathy. If everything is pointless, what reason is there to strive, to love, to even continue living? However, not everyone who grapples with nihilism succumbs to despair. Some find a strange kind of liberation in acknowledging life's apparent lack of objective meaning. When we reject externally imposed purposes, we become free to live more authentically, unburdened by societal expectations or arbitrary standards. We could define success and value on our own terms. But this freedom comes with a profound challenge. Without a shared moral framework, how do we determine right from wrong? What makes one life choice better than another? Existential nihilism offers no answers here. It simply points to the void and forces us to fill it ourselves. For some, this leads to a deeper appreciation for the transient moments of life. A beautiful sunset, a shared laugh, a quiet connection, precisely because they aren't burdened by cosmic significance. Their value becomes purely, intensely human. Critics often accuse existential nihilism of being overly bleak, dangerous, or leading to moral chaos. If there's no ultimate meaning or purpose, they fear, what stops individuals from acting selfishly, cruelly, or irresponsibly? But nihilism doesn't necessarily equate to amorality or destruction. Many philosophers and artists have used it as a starting point for creativity and deep ethical reflection. Dostoevsky explored whether morality could survive without God. Albert Camus, while rejecting the label nihilist, grappled with similar themes through his concept of the absurd. The clash between humanity's innate search for meaning and the universe's silent refusal to provide it. Camus asked whether life is worth living knowing it lacks ultimate meaning. His answer wasn't suicide, physical or philosophical, but rebellion. We should embrace the absurd. In the myth of Sisyphus, he reimagines the Greek myth of a man condemned to eternally push a boulder uphill, only to watch it roll back down. This seems the epitome of pointless struggle. Yet, Camus insists, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because in consciously choosing to continue his task, fully aware of its ultimate futility, Sisyphus rebels against the meaninglessness imposed upon him. He finds meaning not in the outcome, but in the act of living and striving itself. Existential nihilism offers no easy solutions or comforting truths. It strips away illusions. For some, this is terrifying. For others, it's a call to action, a reminder that even if the universe has no purpose for us, we can create purpose for ourselves. The absence of cosmic meaning doesn't necessarily negate the value of existence. It shifts the locus of value entirely onto human experience and choice. There's no map, no destination handed down from above. Only us, and the paths we choose to forge in the face of the void. Finding meaning in suffering. How we respond to life's pain. Suffering is unavoidable. It touches every life. But why does it exist? And more importantly, can it have meaning? Or is it just random, brutal, and pointless? The quest to find meaning within or despite suffering is a central human drama, explored across philosophy, religion, art, and psychology. This isn't just about explaining why bad things happen, the problem of suffering, but about how humans interpret and respond to pain, and whether that response itself can create value. Does suffering inherently possess meaning, or is meaning something we impose upon it? Perspectives vary widely. Suffering as a teacher or catalyst. Many traditions view suffering not as inherently good, but as a potential catalyst for growth, wisdom, or compassion. Ancient philosophy. Figures like Epicurus argued that understanding the nature of pain, often rooted in fear of death, loss, the unknown, allows us to manage it more wisely. Facing suffering rationally can diminish its power over us. Stoics like Marcus Aurelius saw adversity as an opportunity to practice virtue, courage, resilience, justice, existentialism. Nietzsche saw overcoming hardship as essential for self-realization. What doesn't kill me? Suffering tests us, forces us to confront our limits, and can forge strength and creativity. The meaning isn't in the pain itself, but in the triumph over it. Religious frameworks. Religions often provide narratives that imbue suffering with purpose. Christianity. Suffering can be seen as a test of faith, a path to redemption, a way to share in Christ's suffering or part of a larger divine plan, even if inscrutable. The meaning lies in its connection to a relationship with God and the promise of ultimate salvation. Buddhism. While identifying suffering, dukkha, as fundamental, Buddhism finds meaning not in the suffering itself, but in the path out of it. Understanding its cause, craving/attachment, and following the eightfold path leads to liberation, nirvana. The meaning lies in the potential for release through wisdom and practice. Suffering as meaningless. Nihilism from a nihilistic standpoint. Suffering has no inherent cosmic meaning or purpose. It's simply a brutal fact of an indifferent universe, a byproduct of biological processes or random chance. There's no hidden lesson, no divine test, no ultimate justification. This view can be bleak, forcing us to confront pain without comforting narratives. Yet, it can also be liberating, freeing us from the burden of having to find a reason for every tragedy. If suffering is meaningless, our response doesn't need to justify it. We can simply focus on alleviating it where possible. Finding meaning through response. Logotherapy. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, developed logotherapy based on his experiences. He argued that even in the most horrific circumstances, humans retain the freedom to choose their attitude towards their suffering. While we can't always control what happens to us, we can control our response. Frankl believed the primary human drive is the search for meaning, and this meaning can be found through creative work, experiencing love, or, crucially, through the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. Finding meaning, even in immense pain, is what allows us to endure and affirm life's value. Evolutionary perspective. Functional meaning science explains the function of pain signals, warning of danger, promoting healing and emotional distress, strengthening social bonds, motivating change. This provides a practical, biological meaning. Suffering exists because it conferred survival advantages. This doesn't address the existential question of purpose, but it explains why such mechanisms evolved. Ultimately, whether suffering has inherent meaning is perhaps less important than whether humans can create meaning from it. The interpretation is often deeply personal. For some, hardship deepens spiritual faith. For others, it fuels a commitment to social justice. For many, simply enduring with dignity or finding connection with others who suffer provides a powerful sense of purpose. The search for meaning in suffering highlights our resilience and our profound need to make sense of our experiences. It doesn't erase the pain, but it can transform our relationship to it, turning passive victimhood into active engagement with life's toughest realities. Understanding suffering in its many facets and interpretations brings us closer to understanding ourselves and the fragile, complex, and often painful, yet potentially meaningful human condition. Life as a cosmic accident. Finding meaning in contingency. Forget grand designs and predetermined paths. What if life, all life, including conscious, self-aware human life, is simply the result of a staggering series of cosmic accidents? Not planned, not intended, not inevitable, but highly improbable outcome of blind physical forces and random chance unfolding across billions of years in an indifferent universe. From the formation of the first atoms to the emergence of consciousness, every step seems contingent, unlikely, almost miraculous in its sheer improbability. What does this realization mean for how we see ourselves, our purpose, and the nature of existence? To grasp life as a cosmic accident, we rewind to the beginning, roughly 13.8 billion years ago, the Big Bang. From an infinitely dense point, space, time, and matter exploded outwards. In the chaotic aftermath, particles collided, energy flowed, and eventually, the first simple atoms formed. Gravity pulled these atoms together into stars and galaxies. There was no blueprint, no guiding hand, just the unfolding consequences of physical laws. Within this vast, indifferent cosmos, an ordinary star, our Sun, formed about 4.6 billion years ago in an ordinary galaxy. Around it, leftover debris coalesced into planets. One of these, Earth, just happened to end up in the right place. A stable orbit, a protective atmosphere, the right temperature range for liquid water to exist. Earth wasn't chosen. It was lucky. A cosmic lottery win. Life likely began in Earth's early oceans, perhaps from simple organic molecules forming and interacting under specific conditions. Gradually, some molecules developed the ability to self-replicate, the dawn of primitive life. From there, evolution took over, itself a process driven largely by chance. Random mutations occur in genetic code. Natural selection favors those mutations that happen to enhance survival and reproduction in a given environment. Over eons, this blind, unguided process led to the incredible diversity of life we see today, including us, creatures capable of contemplating our own accidental origins. Here's the humbling part. None of this had to happen. A slightly different Big Bang, a slightly different Earth orbit, a different asteroid impact, a minor tweak in evolutionary history, and we wouldn't be here. The conditions for complex, intelligent life seem so exquisitely fine-tuned that our existence feels almost impossible. Yet, there's no scientific evidence for an external guiding force or predetermined purpose. It appears to be the result of natural processes and countless lucky breaks. This realization can evoke both awe and unease. Awe at the sheer improbability and wonder of our existence. We are, as Carl Sagan famously put it, star stuff, made from elements forged in the hearts of dying stars. Unease because it disinterres humanity. We aren't the pinnacle of creation or the universe's darlings. The cosmos existed long before us, and will likely continue long after we're gone. Our struggles, triumphs, and civilizations are fleeting blips on the cosmic timescale. But does being a cosmic accident automatically mean life is meaningless? If the universe doesn't care about us, is everything we do futile? Existentialist response. As discussed with the absurd, the lack of inherent meaning isn't necessarily a negative. It's an opportunity. If life has no pre-written script, we are free to write our own. Meaning isn't found out there. It's created through our choices, actions, and relationships. Cosmic Connection, Sagan's star stuff perspective, offers another view. Recognizing our accidental origins connects us profoundly to the rest of the universe, not diminishes us. We are literally part of the cosmic fabric. Shared contingency. If our existence is accidental, so is the existence of every other living thing, from microbes to whales. This shared vulnerability and improbable origin can foster a deep sense of kinship with all life, encouraging humility and a sense of responsibility. If life is so rare and fragile, perhaps that gives us reason to cherish and protect it, not for some grand purpose, but simply because it is precious. Ultimately, accepting life as a cosmic accident invites us to embrace uncertainty. It asks us to let go of the idea that the universe owes us answers or a special place. Instead, it encourages us to find beauty and meaning within the contingency, the chaos, the sheer improbability of it all. Our lives may not be destined, but they are ours to live. In an indifferent universe, the very act of living, loving, learning, and creating becomes its own powerful statement, a fleeting but vibrant flicker against the vast cosmic backdrop. Misanthropy, a philosophical critique of humanity. Is humanity fundamentally flawed? Perhaps so flawed that its very value or place in the world deserves questioning. This uncomfortable inquiry lies at the heart of philosophical misanthropy, not necessarily a simple hatred of individuals, but a critical skepticism and often profound disappointment with humankind as a whole, its tendencies, its choices, and its collective impact. It challenges our self-perception, our assumed virtues, and the consequences of our actions on ourselves, each other, and the planet. Philosophical misanthropy differs from mere cynicism or bitterness. It's often a reasoned critique focusing on humanity's persistent failure to live up to its own ideals, highlighting recurring patterns of irrationality, selfishness, cruelty, hypocrisy, and destructiveness. Schopenhauer's view. Building on his pessimistic outlook, Schopenhauer saw humanity as largely driven by the blind, selfish will to live, leading to endless conflict, competition, and suffering. He was deeply skeptical of claims to human rationality and morality, viewing egoism as the dominant force. Nietzsche's critique. While critical, Nietzsche's perspective was different. He scorned humanity's herd mentality, its tendency towards mediocrity and conformity. However, he saw these flaws not as reasons for utter rejection, but as challenges to be overcome. His critique was a call for humanity, or at least exceptional individuals, to transcend its limitations and strive for greatness, rather than wallowing in comfortable self-deception. Ancient cynicism. The Greek cynic Diogenes famously exemplified a form of misanthropic critique. His alleged search with a lantern in daylight for an honest man was a scathing commentary on the perceived hypocrisy and vanity of society. He rejected social conventions and materialism, believing they corrupted human virtue. His misanthropy stemmed from disappointment with humanity's failure to live authentically and virtuously. Civilization's corruption. Rousseau, even thinkers with a more optimistic view of innate human nature, expressed misanthropic sentiments about society. Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that humans are naturally good but become corrupted by civilization, which fosters inequality, greed, and moral decay. His critique focused on the negative impact of social structures, though he held out hope for a return to simpler, more virtuous ways of living. Environmental concerns. Modern misanthropic thought often focuses heavily on humanity's devastating impact on the environment. Thinkers associated with deep ecology, like Arness, argue that human exploitation of nature reveals a dangerous anthropocentrism. From this perspective, humanity often acts as a destructive force, prioritizing its own interests above all other species and ecosystems, reflecting a collective flaw. Existential disillusionment. Émile Cioran wrote extensively on the absurdity and futility of human existence. He saw humanity's relentless pursuit of meaning as often masking deeper flaws: arrogance, destructiveness, a refusal to confront limitations. His work, though bleak, often contains a dark humor recognizing the tragicomic contradictions of the human condition. Critics often argue that misanthropy is too sweeping and negative, unfairly overlooking human kindness, creativity, altruism, and progress. Focusing only on failure's risks, ignoring humanity's potential for good. However, many philosophical misanthropes would counter that their critique isn't absolute condemnation, but an attempt at unflinching honesty. They might argue that only by acknowledging our collective flaws can we even begin to address them. The purpose isn't necessarily to hate, but to see clearly without rose-tinted glasses. This raises difficult ethical questions. If humanity is indeed deeply flawed, what should be done? Strive for change? Accept our limitations? Nietzsche saw misanthropy as a spur to self-overcoming. Schopenhauer leaned towards resignation, seeing our flawed nature as largely immutable. Ultimately, philosophical misanthropy acts like a mirror held up to humanity. It forces us to confront our collective failings, question our assumptions, and reconsider what it truly means to be good or valuable. Whether it leads to despair, hope for change, or simply a more sober understanding, it compels a critical engagement with our own nature, demanding we look honestly at who we are and whether we can, or even want to do better. Negative utilitarianism. Prioritizing the reduction of suffering. Imagine a moral framework where the highest goal isn't maximizing happiness, but relentlessly minimizing suffering. This is the core idea behind negative utilitarianism, a distinct and sometimes controversial branch of utilitarian thought. Traditional, classical utilitarianism, famously associated with thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, aims to achieve the greatest good for the greatest number, usually interpreted as maximizing overall happiness or well-being. Negative utilitarianism flips the script. It argues that reducing or eliminating suffering should take absolute priority over promoting pleasure or happiness. Why this emphasis? Proponents argue that suffering carries a unique moral weight. While happiness makes life more pleasant, pain, whether physical or emotional, can utterly dominate and destroy a person's existence. As philosopher Karl Popper, an early proponent of this view, suggested, the moral imperative to alleviate suffering is far more urgent and direct than the goal of increasing happiness. You can live a life without intense joy, but intense suffering makes life unbearable. Removing pain directly improves the condition of those afflicted in a way that simply adding more pleasure to an already content life does not. In many practical scenarios, this principle seems intuitive. Feeding the hungry doesn't just make them happier. It crucially stops the torment of starvation. Providing shelter for the homeless, treating the sick, offering mental health support. These actions directly reduce suffering and align well with a negative utilitarian approach. They aren't just about making life nicer. They're about making it less miserable. However, negative utilitarianism becomes far more controversial when applied on a larger, even global scale. If the world contains significantly more suffering than happiness, a debatable but plausible premise for some, should drastic actions be taken to prevent future suffering? This is where negative utilitarianism often intersects with antinatalism. Some negative utilitarians argue that if human existence inevitably involves substantial suffering, then the most ethical course of action might be to prevent new lives from starting, thus preventing the suffering they would inevitably endure. It's these kinds of conclusions that draw criticism. Detractors argue that taking negative utilitarianism to its logical extreme could lead to disturbing, even horrifying outcomes. For instance, the infamous world destruction argument suggests that if the ultimate goal is to eliminate all suffering, the quickest and most efficient way might be the painless elimination of all sentient life. No se entiende bien si iguala no suffering. While few, if any, serious proponents advocate for this, the thought experiment highlights the potential dangers of prioritizing suffering reduction above all other values, such as the value of life itself, autonomy, or joy. However, most adherents use negative utilitarianism not as a blueprint for drastic action, but as a moral compass for prioritization in everyday ethics and policy. For example, in global health initiatives with limited resources, a negative utilitarian might argue for prioritizing treatments for the most debilitating diseases or providing aid to regions suffering extreme famine or conflict, rather than focusing on general quality of life, improvements for those already relatively comfortable. When resources are scarce, tackling the worst suffering first seems ethically compelling. Negative utilitarianism also prompts us to re-examine how we view suffering in our personal lives and culture. Many societies implicitly or explicitly value endurance, seeing suffering as necessary for growth or achievement. No pain, no gain. But if minimizing suffering is paramount, should we challenge these narratives? Is pain truly a virtue builder, or is it simply something we should strive to eliminate wherever possible for ourselves and others? Ultimately, negative utilitarianism doesn't deny the value of happiness. It simply asks a critical question. Given the profound impact of suffering, shouldn't its reduction be our primary moral focus? It doesn't demand we abandon joy, but it reminds us that while pursuing happiness, we have a powerful obligation not to forget and actively work to alleviate the immense suffering present in the world. Philosophical pessimism, confronting life's harsh realities. What if the prevailing narrative of optimism and progress is fundamentally flawed? What if life, at its core, is characterized more by struggle, suffering, and unfulfilled desire than by lasting joy and satisfaction? This challenging perspective is the foundation of philosophical pessimism, a school of thought that questions rosy assumptions about human existence and encourages an unflinching look at life's difficulties. It's important to distinguish philosophical pessimism from simple emotional negativity or cynicism. It's not just about feeling down. It's a reasoned argument, often based on observations about the nature of consciousness, desire, and the world itself. It aims not necessarily to depress, but to foster a more realistic, perhaps even resilient, understanding of our condition. Key figures shaped this perspective. Arthur Schopenhauer, arguably the most influential philosophical pessimist, Schopenhauer believed the root of human and animal suffering lies in the will to live, a blind, irrational, insatiable force driving all beings to strive, desire, and procreate. This will create a perpetual cycle. Desire leads to temporary satisfaction or frustration, which immediately gives way to new desires or boredom. True, lasting contentment is impossible because the will is never permanently quenched. Life, for Schopenhauer, is thus fundamentally characterized by dissatisfaction and suffering, punctuated by fleeting moments of relief that are often mistaken for happiness. He famously suggested that it might have been better never to have existed at all. Friedrich Nietzsche, while often associated with affirming life, Nietzsche deeply engaged with pessimistic ideas, particularly Schopenhauer's. He acknowledged the suffering and apparent meaninglessness of existence, but rejected Schopenhauer's resignation. Instead, Nietzsche called for embracing life's hardships, chaos, and terrors as necessary components of strength and greatness. Recognizing life's harshness wasn't a reason for despair, but a call to overcome it, to create one's own values and become who you are. His pessimism was a starting point, not an end. Emil Cioran, a 20th-century Romanian philosopher known for his aphoristic and deeply melancholic style, Cioran explored themes of absurdity, suffering, alienation, and the futility of human endeavors. His work reflects a profound sense of disillusionment with existence, viewing life as a constant struggle against despair, where moments of clarity often reveal the emptiness underlying our efforts. For Cioran, pessimism wasn't a system to be solved, but a lens through which to view life with stark, often uncomfortable, honesty. Core themes in philosophical pessimism often include critique of progress. Pessimists are often skeptical of the widespread belief in inevitable human progress, whether technological, social, or moral. While acknowledging improvements in certain areas, they argue that the fundamental nature of human suffering, rooted in desire, mortality, conflict, etc., remains largely unchanged. New technologies bring new problems. Social changes often create new forms of discontent. Questioning happiness as the goal. The modern obsession with achieving happiness is seen as potentially misguided. Pessimists argue that happiness is often fleeting, elusive, and perhaps not even the most important value. Chasing an idealized state of constant contentment may lead to more disappointment than fulfillment. They might advocate instead for accepting life's inherent limitations and finding meaning or dignity within the struggle, rather than solely in its absence. Despite its bleak outlook, philosophical pessimism can offer certain insights or even comforts. Realism and resilience. Facing difficulties honestly, without sugarcoating, can foster resilience. Acknowledging that struggle is normal can make setbacks feel less like personal failures. Solidarity in suffering. Recognizing that pain and hardship are universal human experiences can cultivate empathy and compassion. Shared vulnerability can be a source of connection. Counteracting naive optimism. Pessimism provides the necessary counterweight to overly simplistic or Pollyannish views of the world, encouraging critical thinking. Critics argue that pessimism is overly negative, ignores life's beauty and potential, and can become a self-fulfilling prophecy leading to inaction or despair. Pessimists might respond that they don't deny the existence of joy or beauty, but refuse to let these overshadow the pervasive reality of suffering. True appreciation of life, they might argue, requires acknowledging its full spectrum, including the darkness. Ultimately, philosophical pessimism isn't necessarily a philosophy of despair, but one of radical honesty. It challenges us to confront existence without illusions, acknowledging its difficulties without flinching. This confrontation, while potentially painful, can also be liberating, freeing us from unrealistic expectations and allowing us to engage with life more authentically, finding meaning perhaps not in guaranteed happiness, but in the very act of enduring and striving within a flawed reality. Quietism, finding peace by letting go of the struggle. What if the best way to deal with life's problems isn't to constantly fight them, but to simply stop trying so hard? This challenging idea lies at the heart of quietism, a philosophical and spiritual perspective that encourages us to release the relentless struggle for answers and control, and instead, learn to accept life as it unfolds. Quietism isn't about apathy or defeat. It's not suggesting we give up on everything that matters. Rather, it proposes stepping back from the constant noise of human ambition, striving, and anxiety to find a different kind of peace, one found in simplicity, stillness, and acceptance. Imagine someone standing in a powerful river, desperately trying to swim upstream. They expend enormous energy fighting the current, yet they make little progress, perhaps even getting swept backward or just managing to stay in place. Quietism suggests that instead of battling the water, perhaps the wiser path is to relax, float, and allow the current to carry you. This isn't resignation. It's recognizing that some struggles are futile or self-imposed, and choosing a path of harmony with the flow of life, rather than constant resistance against it. The roots of quietist thought can be traced across various traditions. Ancient Greek skepticism, Pyrrho of Elis, founder of Pyrrhonism, argued that since we can never achieve absolute certainty about anything, the constant striving for it only leads to anxiety, ataraxia. His solution was epike, suspension of judgment. By refusing to make absolute claims about reality, one could attain inner tranquility. Peace comes from letting go of the need to know and control everything. Christian mysticism. In 17th century Europe, quietism took on a distinctly religious form, notably through the Spanish priest Miguel de Molinos. He taught that the soul finds true union with God, not through active striving or good works, but through passive contemplation, absolute stillness, and complete surrender to divine will. Human effort was seen as ultimately inadequate. Serenity lay in utter abandonment to God. Eastern philosophies, quietism resonates deeply with concepts in Taoism and Zen Buddhism. The Taoist principle of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, advocates aligning oneself with the natural flow, the Tao, rather than forcing outcomes. Similarly, Zen emphasizes letting go of attachments, quieting the ego-driven mind, and accepting the present moment as it is. Despite these diverse origins, a common thread emerges. True peace isn't found through external achievement or control, but through internal acceptance and surrender. However, quietism faces criticism. It's often misunderstood as promoting passivity, irresponsibility, or even indifference to suffering and injustice. If we simply accept things as they are, critics ask, doesn't that mean condoning oppression or failing to act when action is needed? Proponents counter that quietism isn't about indifference, but about a shift in perspective and the source of action. They argue much human suffering arises not from external events themselves, but from our resistance to them, our desperate attempts to impose our will on an uncontrollable reality. By letting go of the need to control everything, we can potentially see situations more clearly and act more wisely and compassionately, free from the distortions of ego, frustration, and desperation. In modern philosophy, echoes of quietism appear in the later work of Ludwig Wittgenstein. He came to believe that many deep philosophical problems weren't genuine puzzles needing solutions, but rather conceptual confusions arising from misuse of language. They needed to be dissolved, not solved. As he famously wrote, "What we cannot speak about we must pass over in silence." For Wittgenstein, philosophy's role wasn't necessarily to provide grand answers, but to help us recognize the limits of our understanding and find a kind of peace within those limits. Quietism offers a radical counterpoint to our modern obsession with productivity, progress, and self-improvement. It invites us to question whether the constant pursuit of more success, knowledge, control, actually makes us happier or just more stressed and dissatisfied. By pausing the relentless striving, we might discover a deeper sense of contentment and clarity. Quietism isn't a simple philosophy or a one-size-fits-all solution. It doesn't demand we abandon all effort, but asks for careful reflection on which struggles are necessary and which are self-inflicted. For some, it offers a way to cope with life's inherent uncertainties. For others, it's a reminder to slow down and appreciate the present. In whatever form, quietism forces a re-evaluation of the relationship between action and stillness, control and acceptance. It's ultimately a philosophy of simplicity, inviting us to find peace not by changing the world, but perhaps by changing our relationship to it. In a noisy, frantic world, it offers the radical possibility of embracing silence, stillness, and the quiet power of letting go. The absurd, embracing life in a meaningless universe. We crave meaning, purpose, and rational order. We look to the universe for answers, for a sign that our existence matters in some grand cosmic scheme. But the universe remains stubbornly silent. It offers no inherent purpose, no divine blueprint, no ultimate justification for our being here. This fundamental clash between our human yearning for meaning and the universe's apparent indifference is what philosopher Albert Camus called the absurd. Crucially, Camus didn't see the absurd as a problem to be solved or a mystery to be unraveled. He saw it as a fundamental condition of human existence, a reality we must learn to live with. Recognizing the absurd isn't supposed to lead to despair, but paradoxically, it can be the key to a unique kind of freedom and joy, a way of living authentically, liberated from false hopes and comforting illusions. The absurd stems from our very nature. We ask why. Why are we here? Why do we suffer? What's the point? We build systems, religion, philosophy, science, art, trying to fill this existential void. But no matter how hard we search, the universe provides no definitive answer. It simply is. The moment we truly grasp this disconnect, our need for meaning meeting cosmic silence can feel like a betrayal. The absurd isn't just a lofty philosophical concept. It manifests in everyday life. You strive for years towards a goal, only to find the satisfaction fleeting. You fall into routines, wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat, that can suddenly feel hollow. These moments expose the gap between our expectations of life and the often indifferent reality we encounter, reminding us that solid, ultimate meaning remains elusive. Faced with the absurd, Camus observed, people often seek escape routes. One common escape he called philosophical suicide, abandoning the difficult search for individual meaning and leaping into prepackaged belief systems. Whether religious dogma, it's all God's plan, or rigid ideologies, history dictates this outcome. These offer ready-made answers, but Camus argued they involve a denial of our freedom and a failure to confront the truth of our situation. So, if there's no ultimate purpose, is life worth living? Camus considered this the one truly serious philosophical problem. His answer wasn't resignation or despair, but rebellion. The lack of preordained meaning doesn't devalue life, it liberates it. We are free to create our own meaning, moment by moment, through our choices and actions, rather than searching for one that doesn't exist. Camus famously illustrated this with the myth of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to eternally push a boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll down again. It seems the ultimate symbol of futile, meaningless labor. But Camus saw Sisyphus not as a victim, but as an absurd hero. By consciously accepting his fate, embracing the struggle without hope of ultimate success, and continuing to push the boulder anyway, Sisyphus reclaims his dignity and freedom. He finds meaning not in the pointless task itself, but in his defiance of its pointlessness. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, Camus wrote. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Sisyphus's happiness isn't based on illusion. It comes from fully embracing life as it is, with all its limitations and lack of ultimate cosmic validation. The absurd reminds us that we can live intensely and passionately now, without needing a guarantee of eternal significance. We are free to pursue what genuinely brings us joy and value. Love, creativity, connection, the simple appreciation of being alive, on our own terms. This perspective also challenges conventional notions of success and failure. In a meaningless universe, external benchmarks lose their ultimate authority. What matters isn't achieving fame or fortune, but living authentically, true to oneself, embracing the experience of being. This frees us from the pressure to conform to societal expectations. Accepting the absurd isn't easy. It requires letting go of comforting illusions and facing ambiguity. But the reward is a profound freedom. We stop searching for non-existent answers and start focusing on the experience of living in all its messy, beautiful, chaotic reality. The absurd is both a challenge and a gift, demanding we live fully in the face of meaninglessness, finding joy not in spite of the universe's silence, but precisely because of it. Life, even without ultimate meaning, becomes an adventure worth embracing. The hedonic treadmill: why we're never satisfied and how to step off. Why does lasting happiness seem so elusive? We chase new goals, dream of bigger achievements, and tell ourselves, if only I had more money, more success, more love, then I'd finally be content. Yet, when we achieve those things, the satisfaction often fades surprisingly quickly, and we find ourselves looking towards the next thing. This endless cycle of pursuit and adaptation is what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, or hedonic adaptation. It suggests that our search for happiness often keeps us running in place. The concept describes our tendency to return to a relatively stable baseline level of happiness, regardless of positive or negative events in our lives. Positive events: get that dream job, win a lottery, find a new relationship. There's an initial boost in happiness. But over time, we adapt. The novelty wears off, the new situation becomes the new normal, and our happiness level tends to drift back towards where it started. Negative events: experience a job loss, a breakup, or a health setback. There's an initial dip in happiness, often significant. But again, over time, most people adapt. We find coping mechanisms, our perspective shifts, and eventually, our happiness level tends to recover, often returning surprisingly close to its previous baseline. This isn't just anecdotal. Research supports it. Studies on lottery winners and accident victims, for example, often show that major life changes have less long-term impact on reported happiness than we might intuitively expect. People are remarkably resilient and adaptable, both to good fortune and bad. This doesn't mean happiness is unattainable, but it strongly suggests our expectations about what will bring lasting happiness are often flawed. We overestimate the impact of external circumstances, money, status, possessions, on our long-term well-being. The human mind is designed to adapt. What was once exciting becomes routine. The dream house becomes just the house. The ideal job becomes just the job. This adaptation keeps us on the treadmill, constantly seeking the next fix that promises lasting fulfillment. The hedonic treadmill likely has evolutionary roots. For our ancestors, survival depended on constant striving. Complacency was dangerous. Those who continually sought food, shelter, and safety were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. This relentless drive served us well in the past, but in modern society, with basic needs often met, it can manifest as a perpetual feeling of never enough, no matter how much we achieve. Understanding the hedonic treadmill can be empowering. It helps us recalibrate our approach to happiness. De-emphasize external goals beyond basic needs. Research shows that while money significantly impacts happiness up to the point where basic needs are met and financial stress is alleviated, beyond that, additional income has diminishing returns on life satisfaction. Chasing wealth indefinitely often doesn't lead to the expected payoff in lasting happiness. Focus on experiences, not possessions. Studies suggest experiences, like travel, learning new skills, spending time with loved ones, tend to provide more enduring happiness than material goods. Experiences create memories, foster connections, and are less prone to adaptation than objects, which often lose their appeal over time. Investing in relationships, personal growth, and meaningful activities yields better long-term results. Cultivate gratitude. Actively appreciating what we do have shifts our focus from lack to abundance. Regularly practicing gratitude has been shown to increase happiness, reduce stress, and improve relationships. It directly counters the treadmill's tendency to make us take things for granted. Practice mindfulness. Being present in the moment allows us to savor simple pleasures and appreciate life as it is, without constantly yearning for something more or different. Mindfulness helps us recognize when we're caught in the cycle of desire and reminds us that happiness is often a state of mind available now, not a destination to be reached later. While the treadmill highlights the challenge of sustaining elevated happiness, it also underscores our incredible capacity for adaptation and resilience in the face of adversity. Understanding how it works allows us to navigate life's ups and downs with more equanimity, recognizing that both intense joy and deep sorrow are often temporary states. This doesn't mean abandoning goals or ambition. Striving and progress are part of a fulfilling life. But the hedonic treadmill prompts us to question why we're pursuing certain goals. Are we aiming for something genuinely meaningful, or just running faster on the treadmill without getting anywhere truly satisfying? It encourages a shift from chasing external achievements to cultivating internal states like gratitude, connection, and presence. By understanding the treadmill, we can learn to step off the endless pursuit and find a deeper, more stable sense of well-being, appreciating the journey rather than constantly chasing a receding finish line. The paradox of freedom: why limits make us free. Freedom is perhaps humanity's most cherished ideal, the ultimate aspiration. Yet, the very concept is riddled with paradox. The paradox of freedom lies in the tension between our deep desire for complete autonomy and the often necessary constraints, rules, and responsibilities that actually give freedom its meaning and make it function in the real world. Absolute, boundless freedom might sound appealing, but it can lead to paralysis, meaninglessness, or even tyranny. Consider a world with no rules, no expectations, no consequences. Initially liberating, perhaps, but soon, choices might feel arbitrary. If anything is permissible, does any particular choice truly matter? Without structure or limits, freedom can dissolve into chaos or become overwhelming. This is the core paradox. Absolute freedom can feel like no freedom at all. Meaningful freedom seems to require some form of limitation. This paradox unfolds in several ways. Freedom and responsibility. To be free is to have choices, but every choice carries consequences. True freedom involves accepting responsibility for our actions. Yet, the weight of this responsibility can itself feel constraining. The more freedom we have, the more responsibility we bear, creating a delicate balance. A society that grants extensive freedoms must also establish systems of accountability. These rules, while limiting individual action, are what allow collective freedom to thrive. Freedom and society. Humans are social creatures. Genuine freedom rarely exists in total isolation, but living together requires compromise. We often limit our individual freedoms, e.g., obeying traffic laws, paying taxes, for the sake of collective order and well-being. Laws restrict behavior, but also create the stability necessary for most people to experience freedom from chaos or oppression. The tension between individual liberty and social order is constant. Freedom and desire. We often equate freedom with the ability to satisfy all our desires without hindrance. But desires themselves can become chains. Addictions, obsessions, or the relentless pursuit of external validation can enslave us, eroding our self-control. In this sense, the freedom to follow every impulse can lead to the loss of a deeper freedom, The freedom from being ruled by those impulses, the freedom to act in accordance with our true values. This is central to philosophies like Stoicism, which teach that true freedom comes from inner self-mastery, focusing on what we can control, our responses, judgments, rather than external circumstances or fleeting desires. For Stoics, freedom isn't the absence of limits, but the wisdom to navigate them virtuously. Freedom and choice overload. Modern life bombards us with seemingly infinite choices, careers, products, lifestyles. Yet, psychologists find that too much choice can lead to anxiety, indecision, and lower satisfaction, paralysis by analysis, fear of missing out. The pursuit of limitless options can paradoxically leave us feeling trapped and less happy. Freedom and self-discipline. We think of freedom as doing whatever we want. But sometimes, what we want now conflicts with our long-term goals or well-being. Self-discipline and restraint might feel like limitations, but they are often the very tools that enable us to achieve greater, more meaningful freedom over time. An artist practices scales for hours, limiting immediate leisure, to gain the freedom of musical expression. Committing to a principle or a long-term project, while constraining in the short term, can provide a sense of purpose and direction that boundless, aimless freedom cannot. Freedom and technology. Technology often promises more freedom. Freedom to communicate, travel, access information. But these same technologies can become tools of surveillance, distraction, or dependency. Social media offers freedom of expression, but can trap us in algorithmic bubbles or addictive behaviors. The tools created to liberate can sometimes enslave. The paradox of freedom isn't a problem to be solved, but a fundamental tension inherent in the human condition. It reminds us that freedom isn't simply the absence of constraints, but the art of finding a meaningful balance within the necessary limits of life, society, and our own nature. It's about exercising choice responsibly, living authentically within a community, and mastering ourselves, not just our circumstances. Understanding this paradox doesn't devalue freedom. It enriches our appreciation for it, showing that the most profound forms of liberty often arise not from escaping limits, but from understanding and navigating them wisely. The repugnant conclusion: billions barely living versus fewer, truly happy? Here's a deeply unsettling thought experiment. Imagine comparing two possible future worlds. World A has a relatively small population, but everyone in it lives an incredibly happy, fulfilling life. World Z has an astronomically large population, billions upon billions, but each person lives a life that is only barely worth living. Their lives contain slightly more happiness than suffering, but just barely. They aren't miserable, but they certainly aren't thriving. Now, which world is ethically better? Intuition screams World A. Surely a world of genuine flourishing is preferable to a world of mass mediocrity, even if that mediocrity isn't outright suffering. But here's the philosophical kicker. According to some standard forms of utilitarian ethics, particularly those focused on maximizing total happiness, total utilitarianism, World Z might actually be considered better. Why? Because even though each individual's happiness in World Z is minuscule, the sheer number of people means the total sum of happiness across the entire population could potentially outweigh the total happiness in the smaller, much happier World A. This outcome is what philosopher Derek Parfit famously termed the repugnant conclusion. It feels repugnant because it clashes violently with our deeply held moral intuitions about quality of life over sheer quantity. It suggests that we could be morally obligated to choose a future teeming with lives barely worth experiencing over a future with fewer lives that are rich and meaningful. The repugnant conclusion often arises from considering the mere addition paradox. Start with World A small, very happy. Now imagine adding a group of people whose lives are less happy than those in A, but still well worth living, creating World A+. Total utilitarianism would likely say A+ is better than A because total happiness has increased. Now, imagine redistributing resources slightly so everyone in A+ ends up slightly less happy than the original A inhabitants, but more equal world B. B might still have higher total happiness than A. If you keep repeating this process, adding more people with slightly lower but still positive quality of life and averaging down, you can logically slide towards world Z, where immense numbers compensate for abysmal individual quality of life, yet the total happiness keeps ticking upwards. The reason the repugnant conclusion is so disturbing is that it seems to treat people as mere containers for happiness, interchangeable units whose individual flourishing doesn't matter as much as the aggregate sum. It ignores the depth, richness, and complexity of a well-lived human life, raising questions about whether happiness can truly be quantified and aggregated in such a simple way. Can a million tiny, barely noticeable pleasures truly outweigh one profound, life-altering joy? Philosophers have proposed various ways to escape the repugnant conclusion. Reject total utilitarianism. Perhaps the problem lies not with the conclusion, but with the premise. Maybe maximizing total happiness isn't the right goal. Ethics might need to incorporate other values like justice, dignity, individual rights, or a minimum threshold for quality of life. Adopt average utilitarianism. Instead of total happiness, maybe we should aim to maximize the average happiness per person. This would clearly favor world A over world Z. However, this approach has its own troubling implication. It could theoretically justify eliminating less happy people to raise the average, which seems morally monstrous. Focus on existing people. Some argue that our primary moral obligations are to improve the lives of people who already exist or will definitely exist, rather than feeling obligated to create more potentially happy or barely happy people just to boost a total score. This challenges the assumption that adding more happy lives always makes the world better. Perfectionism or threshold views. Perhaps there are certain goods or levels of well-being that are qualitatively more important than just adding more lives above a bare minimum. The repugnant conclusion isn't just an abstract puzzle. It has real-world relevance for debates about population ethics, resource allocation, and sustainable development. When policymakers weigh decisions that might improve life quality for a few versus providing basic needs for many, echoes of this dilemma appear. Parfit's uncomfortable conclusion forces us to scrutinize our most basic assumptions about what constitutes a good future and grapple with the profound ethical challenges of balancing individual well-being against the sheer number of lives. It acts as a mirror, reflecting the tensions and potential contradictions within our own moral thinking. The problem of suffering. Why does life hurt? If the universe can produce beauty, joy, and love, why is it also saturated with pain, loss, cruelty, and despair? This fundamental question is known as the problem of suffering, or sometimes, particularly in religious contexts, the problem of evil. It's a question that has haunted humanity for millennia, challenging our understanding of existence, morality, and the very nature of reality. At its core, it asks not just why suffering exists, but what it means and how we should respond to it. Suffering takes countless forms: the physical agony of injury or illness, the mental anguish of grief, betrayal, or anxiety, the systemic suffering caused by injustice and oppression. It's a universal aspect of the sentient experience. No one escapes it entirely. Rich or poor, powerful or weak, human or animal, suffering touches all beings capable of feeling it. What makes suffering so perplexing is its sheer prevalence and apparent randomness. Does it serve a necessary purpose? Is it merely a byproduct of indifferent physical laws, or is there some deeper meaning or cosmic intention behind it? Philosophers and theologians have grappled with this for centuries. Theological perspectives. For those who believe in a benevolent and omnipotent God, suffering poses a significant challenge: theodicy. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why allow such widespread pain? Explanations vary. Suffering as a test of faith, like the story of Job. A consequence of human free will, a necessary condition for spiritual growth, or part of a divine plan beyond human comprehension. However, these explanations often feel unsatisfying. especially when confronted with seemingly gratuitous suffering like natural disasters, childhood illnesses, or the suffering of animals, which don't easily fit narratives of free will or moral testing. Secular and evolutionary perspectives. Non-religious viewpoints often explain suffering through biology and evolution. Physical pain serves a vital survival function, warning us of danger, touching fire, recognizing injury. Emotional pain can also have evolutionary roots. Fear motivates avoidance of threats. Grief might signal the importance of social bonds. Anxiety might prepare us for challenges. From this perspective, suffering isn't a cosmic punishment or moral failing, but a built-in, often adaptive, mechanism necessary for life as we know it to persist in a dangerous world. Understanding its function, however, doesn't make it less painful, and it still leaves the question, why is life structured upon such a foundation of potential agony? Existentialist views. Thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre saw suffering not just as unavoidable, but as integral to a meaningful human existence. Nietzsche famously claimed, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," suggesting that hardship forces us to confront our limits, forge resilience, and create our own values in an indifferent universe. Suffering wasn't something to merely endure, but potentially something to overcome and integrate into a powerful affirmation of life. Sartre viewed suffering partly as the price of freedom. Our capacity for choice, hope, and desire inevitably exposes us to disappointment, anxiety, and the anguish of responsibility. Buddhist philosophy. Buddhism places suffering, dukkha, at the very center of its teachings with the first noble truth: life is suffering. It diagnoses the root cause as attachment and craving. Our desire for pleasure, permanence, and control clashes with the impermanent nature of reality, leading inevitably to disappointment. The Buddhist path isn't about eliminating suffering entirely, in the sense of avoiding all unpleasantness, but about understanding its origins through wisdom, cultivating detachment through ethical conduct, and achieving liberation through mindfulness and meditation. Modern psychology. Contemporary psychology sheds light on how our minds process and sometimes amplify suffering. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for instance, highlights how our thoughts about an event, not just the event itself, contribute significantly to our emotional pain. Losing a job is difficult, but the suffering is often magnified by thoughts like, "I'm a failure," or "I'll never recover." Mindfulness practices help individuals observe pain without being overwhelmed by it, fostering acceptance and resilience. In recent years, the rise of transhumanism has added a new dimension, proposing that technology might eventually allow us to eliminate suffering altogether through genetic engineering, neural implants, or even uploading consciousness. This raises profound ethical questions. Should we eliminate suffering if we could? Does suffering serve some essential, character-building purpose that we lose? Or is its eradication the ultimate humanitarian goal? Ultimately, the problem of suffering remains deeply personal. We confront it in illness, loss, failure, and witnessing injustice. Some find solace in faith, others in philosophy, community, or activism. Regardless of the path, the shared human experience of grappling with pain, searching for meaning in adversity, and hoping for something better connects us. Suffering is a paradox, universal yet isolating, potentially destructive yet sometimes transformative. Perhaps the greatest lesson suffering teaches isn't why it exists, but how our shared vulnerability can foster empathy, courage, and a relentless desire for understanding and connection. Transhumanism. Engineering the future of humanity. What if humanity could seize control of its own evolution, enhancing our bodies and minds far beyond the limits set by nature? This is the bold and sometimes unsettling vision of transhumanism, a movement that seeks to use science and technology to overcome fundamental human limitations like aging, disease, cognitive constraints, and even death itself, ultimately aiming to redefine what it means to be human. No longer confined to science fiction, transhumanism is a rapidly developing field blending philosophy, ethics, and cutting-edge science. It envisions a future where technologies like biotechnology, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, AI, and neurotechnology allow us to fundamentally alter our biology and capabilities. The core premise is simple. Humans, as shaped by natural evolution, are not necessarily the final product. We have the potential, and perhaps the desire, to become more. Key goals and areas of focus include overcoming biological fragility, defeating aging. Transhumanists often view aging not as inevitable, but as a disease to be cured. Research explores cellular repair, genetic modification, like using CRISPR, and therapies targeting the root causes of senescence, aiming for radical life extension or even biological immortality. Eliminating disease, moving beyond treating diseases to preventing them entirely through genetic engineering, nanobots for internal repair, or advanced diagnostics. Replacing failing organs with superior artificial or bioengineered versions. Cognitive enhancement, augmenting human intelligence and perception. Brain-computer interfaces, BCIs creating direct links between the human brain and computers, potentially enhancing memory, learning speed, problem-solving abilities, or enabling new forms of communication and creativity. Imagine instant access to vast knowledge networks integrated directly into your mind. Pharmacological or genetic enhancements, developing ways to boost focus, creativity, emotional regulation, or other cognitive functions beyond current human norms. Transhumanism is fundamentally a philosophy of radical self-improvement, but it raises profound ethical dilemmas. Access and inequality. Who gets access to these enhancements? Will they be available to all? Or will they create a new, biologically based divide between the enhanced and the unenhanced, exacerbating existing social inequalities? Could wealth determine not just lifestyle, but fundamental biological advantages? Identity and authenticity. As technology becomes increasingly integrated with our bodies and minds, where does the human end and the machine begin? If significant parts of you are artificial or genetically altered, are you still you? Transhumanists often argue identity lies in consciousness and experience, not biology, but this challenges traditional definitions. Meaning and purpose. If we eliminate suffering, achieve indefinite lifespans, and vastly increase intelligence, what would life be like? Some envision a utopia of endless growth and discovery. Others fear stagnation, boredom, or a loss of what makes us fundamentally human. If struggle and limitation are core parts of the human experience, what happens when they are removed? Unforeseen consequences and hubris. Critics worry about the unpredictable risks of tampering with complex biological systems. Is the pursuit of perfection driven by hubris, potentially leading to catastrophic outcomes? Are we distracting ourselves from pressing global issues like poverty and climate change by focusing on individual enhancement? Transhumanists often counter that enhanced capabilities could help solve these problems. The nature of consciousness. Mind uploading. One of the most radical ideas is mind uploading, transferring consciousness to a digital substrate to achieve a form of immortality. This raises deep philosophical questions. Is a digital copy truly you, or just a simulation? What happens to the original biological self? Transhumanism also has environmental implications. Enhanced efficiency might reduce resource consumption, but uncontrolled technological expansion could pose new ecological threats. Ultimately, transhumanism forces us to contemplate humanity's long-term trajectory. Are we content with our current biological form, or will we embrace technology to redefine ourselves? This requires scrutinizing our values, aspirations, and responsibilities. Proponents believe that by pushing the boundaries of the possible, we can create a future of unprecedented flourishing. The journey is just beginning, promising to be both exhilarating and fraught with challenges, forcing us to ask, not just can we enhance humanity, But should we? And what kind of future do we want to create? Vempt. Should humanity voluntarily fade away for the planet's sake? Imagine a world without humans. Forests reclaiming cities, oceans clearing of plastic, endangered species thriving, the atmosphere slowly healing. This is the vision aimed for by the voluntary human extinction movement, Vempt, a provocative and controversial philosophy proposing a stark solution to human-caused environmental crises. We should voluntarily stop procreating and allow the human species to gradually fade away for the good of the Earth and all other living beings. It's crucial to understand that Vempt is not a call for violence, suicide, or hatred of humanity. Its founder, Les Knight, emphasizes that the movement is based entirely on voluntary choice. The core argument stems from compassion, not just for the planet, but arguably also for future generations spared from inheriting a damaged world, and for the countless species pushed towards extinction by human activity. Knight contends that human dominance has inflicted unprecedented harm on the biosphere, and the most ethical response is for us to consciously step aside, allowing the natural world to recover and evolve without our pervasive interference. This movement forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about our species' impact. We've altered ecosystems on a global scale, driven climate change, and caused the ongoing sixth mass extinction event. Forests fall for agriculture and development. Oceans choke on our waste. The atmosphere fills with greenhouse gases. Vempt supporters argue these aren't just problems of poor management. They are the inevitable consequence of a species that consumes resources at an unsustainable rate and prioritizes its own expansion above all else. Even our best efforts at sustainability, they might argue, often come at a cost to other life forms. We can pursue renewable energy, conservation, and sustainable agriculture, but these may only be temporary fixes if the underlying issue is the sheer scale and nature of human presence. For adherents, choosing extinction isn't pessimistic. It's seen as a profoundly altruistic act, prioritizing the health of the entire planet over the continuation of one species. Naturally, Vempt faces significant criticism. A common objection is that it ignores humanity's capacity for positive change. We aren't only destructive. We are also capable of immense creativity, compassion, and innovation. We've developed technologies to restore ecosystems, found ways to mitigate climate change, even if implementation lags, and fought to protect other species. Critics argue that instead of disappearing, humans should focus on becoming better stewards of the Earth, finding ways to live in harmony with nature rather than retreating entirely. Another, more philosophical question arises. Would human extinction truly be better for the planet in an absolute sense? Without humans, nature would undoubtedly rebound in many ways. But the natural cycles of life, including suffering, predation, disease, and competition, would continue. Human extinction might remove one major source of environmental pressure, but it wouldn't eliminate suffering or struggle from the biosphere itself. The movement also raises deep ethical questions about how we value human life itself. Can one advocate for voluntary extinction without implicitly devaluing existing human lives or discouraging efforts to improve the human condition? Supporters stress that it's not about hating humanity, but about recognizing our unique responsibility given our unique impact. The conscious decision not to procreate, in their view, is a powerful way to minimize future harm caused by our species. Vempt fundamentally challenges our notions of progress and our place on Earth. It questions the widespread assumption that growth, whether economic, technological, or demographic, is always inherently good. Instead, it asks, could true progress lie in restraint, in stepping back to allow other life forms the chance to thrive unthreatened by human expansion? This shifts the focus from anthropocentric narratives of human achievement to a broader, biocentric perspective that views the planet as a shared home for all life. Whether one finds Vempt's ultimate goal radical, impractical, or even offensive, its core message resonates with growing anxieties about the environmental crisis. It underscores the urgency of addressing human impact and sparks vital conversations about sustainability, ethics, and the future of life on this planet. Even if one disagrees with the conclusion, VEMP serves as a potent reminder of the consequences of unchecked human activity and the profound ethical responsibilities that come with being the planet's dominant species. It doesn't force acceptance, but simply poses the unsettling question: do we need to continue existing indefinitely at the current cost? The discomfort it provokes is perhaps its main purpose: to make us think, to imagine a world where humanity's legacy isn't destruction, but perhaps a final act of compassion. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology, replacing humanity within nature. Humanity has built a world often profoundly disconnected from its ecological roots. We raise cities, exploit resources, and reshape ecosystems primarily for human benefit, often forgetting the intricate web of life that sustains us. What is the true cost of this human-centered worldview? Eco-philosophy, or environmental philosophy, and, more specifically, deep ecology tackle this question, challenging the assumption that humans are separate from and superior to the rest of nature, and calling for a fundamental shift towards recognizing the value of all life and ecosystems. Eco-philosophy isn't just about practical environmental protection. It delves into the ethical, spiritual, and metaphysical dimensions of our relationship with the natural world. It critiques anthropocentrism, the belief that humans are the central or most significant entities in the universe, and that nature exists primarily to serve human needs. Instead, it proposes a more holistic, interconnected view where humans are just one strand in a complex web of life. One of the most influential movements within eco-philosophy is deep ecology, a term coined by Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss in the 1970s. Næss distinguished between shallow environmentalism, which focuses on tackling specific problems like pollution or resource depletion primarily for human benefit, e.g., clean air for us, resources for our future, and deep ecology, which argues these are symptoms of a deeper malaise, our flawed, anthropocentric relationship with nature itself. Key principles of deep ecology include intrinsic value. All living beings and ecosystems possess value in themselves, independent of their usefulness to humans. A forest isn't just valuable for its timber or carbon sequestration. It has inherent worth simply by existing. This directly challenges instrumental views of nature. Biocentric equality. In principle, all organisms have an equal right to live and flourish. This doesn't mean humans can't meet their vital needs, but it demands a radical reassessment of priorities and a drastic reduction in human interference that harms other species and ecosystems for non-vital purposes. Interconnectedness. Recognizing that humans are fundamentally part of and dependent upon the larger ecological community. Harm to the environment is ultimately harm to ourselves. This fosters humility and a sense of responsibility. Deep ecology has profound implications. It challenges economic systems predicated on endless growth and consumption. It questions the philosophical foundations of human exceptionalism that have historically justified environmental destruction. It calls for a transformation across society, from agriculture and energy production to lifestyle choices, emphasizing sustainability, coexistence, and respecting ecological limits rather than maximizing exploitation. Many deep ecologists also emphasize a spiritual or experiential dimension. Reconnecting with nature isn't just an ecological necessity, but can be a path towards personal wholeness and communal well-being. They often draw inspiration from indigenous cultures that have long viewed humans as part of a larger sacred order, with responsibilities to the land and other beings. Deep ecology is not without its critics. Some argue its principles are too idealistic or impractical in a world driven by economic and political realities. Can humanity realistically prioritize ecosystem health over short-term human interests on a large scale? Others worry that biocentric equality raises complex ethical dilemmas. How do we balance vital human needs against the protection of other species, especially in conflict situations? These critiques highlight the tension between deep ecology's radical vision and the complexities of human society. Despite these challenges, deep ecology remains a powerful lens for understanding our current environmental crises. It argues that ecological destruction isn't just a technical problem, but a moral and philosophical failing. By treating nature merely as a resource, we undermine the very systems that support all life, including our own. Deep ecology invites us to envision a different future, one where humans live in harmony with the Earth, respecting its limits and celebrating its diversity. It also offers practical guidance, encouraging sustainable practices, promoting ecological literacy, and inspiring grassroots movements that challenge destructive systems. Perhaps its most revolutionary aspect is the call for a shift in consciousness, moving beyond seeing nature as other and recognizing our profound embeddedness within it. This shift requires confronting deeply ingrained beliefs and accepting that humans are not the masters of life, but participants in a much larger, interconnected whole. In an era of unprecedented environmental challenges, the questions raised by eco-philosophy and deep ecology are more urgent than ever.